All right, when I'm looking to buy a chronograph watch, there's about 5 things that I'm kind of always looking for in a chronograph. Some of them are kind of small things that are just sort of pet peeves. Some of them I think are more important. And not every chronograph watch has them, particularly when you're looking at affordable watches. One example of a watch that does would be the Bulova Moon watch, which I'm wearing now. But the watch that we're going to be talking about today is actually much more affordable than that right now, and it has a couple of really interesting features that I think, even in addition to those kind of 5 things that I'm always looking for, make it a pretty attractive option. We're going to take a look at the Citizen EcoDrive Brycen chronograph today. So let's take a quick look, and then I'll jump in and tell you what I'm talking about. All right, so before I talk about those 5 things that I'm always looking for in a chronograph, let's get a feel for this and take a quick look at what the dimensions, specifications, and features on this watch are. So for dimensions, it's on the large side, which, you know, for a chronograph isn't always a bad thing. A lot of times there's some pretty small details that you need to read, so having a slightly larger dial, I think, can be a good thing on chronographs like this. But what are we looking at? We're looking at a 43 millimeter diameter case, 12 millimeters thickness, a little bit over 12 millimeters thickness, 22 millimeter lugs, and a fairly wide 51 millimeter lug to lug. But it does have a little bit of curvature to the lug, so I find that it wears pretty well. It definitely wears, I think, more comfortably than like the Bulova Moon watch, but it is still pretty kind of on the larger side. Feature-wise, you're looking at a 60-minute chronograph movement. The buttons have a nice tactile push on some of them. The click kind of moves back and forth between the two pushers. If you push the top one, the click will move down to the bottom one. Kind of odd to explain, but I've seen a number of quartz chronographs that sort of use that function where they've added the tactile feedback into it. You get a tachometer bezel. You're getting a date at 3 o'clock. For subdials, you're getting a 60-minute chronograph counter. You're getting a running second subdial at 6 o'clock. And then over at 9 o'clock, you have a small 24-hour indicator as well. For strap, you're getting a genuine leather strap with a nice signed buckle. The strap is, it's like I said, it's genuine leather, and it appears to be like, it kind of looks like it's a rally strap, but it isn't actually perforated all the way through. So those, what looks like holes on the strap, they don't actually go all the way through. They're just kind of little cutouts on the top layer of the leather. It might have been nice to get an actual rally strap in there, but it's not a deal breaker. And then, of course, you're getting Citizen's EcoDrive movement, which really is one of the standout features on here. I love having EcoDrive on a chronograph. I know that this is just like totally unreasonable, but in my mind, like, there's always this weird thing in the back of my mind, knowing that whenever I activate the chronograph, I'm draining the battery just a little bit faster. And, you probably never actually use a quartz chronograph enough to really make a significant impact in your battery, but knowing that this is a solar-powered chronograph and that I can just run that chronograph as much as I want and it's not really going to affect the battery life at all has been kind of fun. And a lot of times I'm just, I'll start the chronograph because the chronograph seconds actually has a nice sweep to it, so it almost makes me feel like I'm wearing a mechanical watch a little bit. And I'll just activate the chronograph just all the time. Like every time I look at the watch, I'll restart the chronograph and let it run for an hour because it does stop after 1 hour. But because there's not a battery consideration, I can do that. And that's just been sort of a fun little, I think, bonus of having that EcoDrive movement on here. Another nice feature that you're getting on this is that you're getting some lume on the hands. So only the hands are lumed. You're not getting any of the markers, but the lume is surprisingly bright. I was really impressed with the lume that they put on here, especially, again, for a chronograph watch like this where they're only luming the hands, you don't expect to see that great of lume. But it's very bright. It's very functional. Pretty comparable to, I'd say, like how the hands are on my Nighthawk. Again, you don't get the marker, so it's a little bit tough to orient it, but generally in the dark I can tell the time pretty well. It's only on the main hour and minute hands that you're getting any lume at all, though. There's no other lume on the dial. But nice little bonus feature there. Another interesting design choice that they made is they added some numerals around the dial for the markers, but instead of doing hour markers, they did it minutes. So you're getting a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and then a triangle at the 12 o'clock. And I think that's helpful because this one does use the main seconds hand as the chronograph. So not only are you reading minutes, you can also use that to quickly read the chronograph seconds hand on the main dial like that. So I think that's an interesting choice, and yeah, really kind of leans into the functionality. Overall, this is an incredibly functional watch for what you're getting. It's very stylish and very functional. It's a completely functional chronograph, and I think that's, again, we're starting to get into what those 5 things are, but one of the biggest annoyances that I have with chronograph watches, or watches in general, is when they put stylistic things on there that are supposed to be functional but they're not. Classic example of that is a tachometer bezel, but the second hand is not a chronograph second hand. So if they move the chronograph seconds to a subdial and then put a tachometer on there, the tachometer is completely useless. It's just a decoration. On this watch, they really thought it through, where you're getting this really cool vintage style, but at the same time, it's completely functional as a chronograph watch. And I'll get into that. So let's go ahead and talk about what those 5 things are. The 5 things that I kind of look for when I'm looking at a chronograph. And again, in large part, because of the functionality that they add to it. So number one thing I look for in a chronograph watch that I always want to see is high legibility. And really the most, the point that I often find chronographs failing in is when they put their minutes subdial on there. A lot of times when they put the minute subdial on there, they're going to mark like every 5 minutes, which is really hard then to read the minutes in between that. So it's hard to read if it's like, 3 minutes and 30 seconds or something. It's like, you're looking at that subdial, and if they don't have a marker for every single minute, it's hard to tell, is that 2.5 minutes or 3.5 minutes or 1.5 minutes? You really got to do some thinking, and sometimes you can't even actually tell. I've seen some of them where they'll mark like the first 5 minutes, which is helpful, but then after that, it's every 5-minute markers. This one has every single minute marked on there. Very clear, very easy to read. They also did a great job on legibility because this is a larger watch. Even though they have 3 subdials, they've made the minutes subdial and the running seconds hand extra large subdials, and they made the 3rd subdial really tiny. So that 24-hour one, the one that you don't really use that much, is smaller, but that gives more space on the dial for the minutes counter. So it's actually one of the easiest minutes counters that I have seen on a chronograph to actually read. So that's really cool. They have a lot of very detailed marking. You're getting 1/5 of a second markers on the main dial, which again can be used with the chronograph seconds function. So a lot of great legibility on this, and it makes it really easy to actually use the chronograph as a chronograph. So that's the first thing I look for, is that legibility. And again, particularly, I always check the minute subdial, because a lot of times I think chronographs kind of fall short in that. Second thing I look for on a chronograph is you want the big seconds hand, which on a 3-handed watch is typically the only seconds hand that you have. That large one that matches, that's on the same track as the hour and minute hand on it. You want that to actually be a chronograph second hand. You don't want that to be the running seconds hand. So the way it should work on a chronograph, on a real tool chronograph, that seconds hand should be stationary at the 12 o'clock until you activate the chronograph. So you should have your main seconds hand just sitting there waiting for you to activate the chronograph and getting ready to use there. And you should track the seconds on that main track, not on a subdial. And this watch does use the large seconds hand as the chronograph second hand. So that's something I always look for, and I'm glad to see it on this watch. Third thing that I look for on a chronograph watch is I like to see like a bezel or a scale that kind of adds some extra functionality. So you're not only getting the timing function of the chronograph. It's nice to have like a tachometer or a telemeter or a 12-hour bezel. 12-hour bezel, if you have a chronograph that will continuously run past 60 minutes, a 12-hour bezel, in addition to being used for a dual time, can be used to mark hours that have passed, so you can actually track 12 hours of it. This one stops at 60 minutes, so you can't do the 12-hour bezel on this, but it does have a tachometer bezel on it, which I think is cool. Again, it's one of those complications that I'll never use, but I just love the kind of the idea and the style of adding that extra functionality of this. You have a chronograph watch, you have that seconds hand with a tachometer scale on there, at its fingertips. It could also be used for tracking speeds as well. So I think that's kind of a cool extra, and I like seeing that on chronograph watches, having that extra scale or bezel that will give you a little bit of added functionality to the chronograph. Fourth thing that I like to see on a chronograph watch is the ability to time fractions of a second. Now that can be with a fractions of a second subdial, but it can also be if you just have a smooth sweeping second hand and then a detailed enough minute track, or second track in this case, So if you have a smooth sweeping seconds hand on the chronograph, and when you stop it, you can tell if it stops in between a second. You can see the little individual markers. You can see how many fifths of a second have elapsed since the last second. And you can actually time things very precisely just by using, again, that sweeping second hand. So the sweeping second hand on a chronograph isn't necessarily just for looks because it looks cool, although it certainly does. It does actually add a little bit of functionality because if it sweeps instead of ticks, you can track in between the seconds how much time has elapsed. And so that's a really cool feature to have. And this watch definitely has that one as well. So from a functionality standpoint, those are the four things I look at. The fifth one is obviously some level of style. And this is always where the balance is, I think, on chronographs. I've seen a lot of chronographs where I love the style, but they sacrifice all kinds of functionality. On the other hand, it can be tough to make a really functional chronograph also look good. And Citizen, I think they did an amazing job of this. This is, I really appreciate them kind of giving, I feel like they gave their designers a little bit of breathing room, because this doesn't look like many of Citizen's other watches. It's got a really unique look to it. It's a very vintage look. It kind of really conjures up that kind of 1970s racing watch style. I love the colors that they've chosen. So a lot of times with chronographs they like to color code the dial a little bit. So on this one you have kind of an orange chronograph second hand, and then there's an orange border around the black minute track. So you know then that orange, if you see anything orange on the dial, that's going to relate to the chronograph, and the things that aren't orange are relating to the tracking of the time. So it's pretty easy to differentiate. So this is this part of the watch is used for the chronograph, this part of the watch is used for telling for time. I appreciate that. But then just again the colors, this particular one has a nice cream dial. You've got again this black chronograph minutes subdial with an orange border around it. Looks great. Everything about the design is really cool. I love the bezel as well. You get this aluminum black tachometer bezel on it. So yeah, just again, it has a really great vintage look, and at the same time they've managed to make it, again, one of the most functional chronographs that I've really seen. And they've done all this at a pretty affordable price. I think the original retail price must have been closer to $200 or $300, which I think is a fair price for what they're offering here. This is an older watch, and it seems like it's getting maybe towards the end of its life cycle or something, because the price has dropped tremendously this year. I'm able to pick, I think I picked this one up for about $130, between $130 and $140, which is really an amazing deal for everything that you're getting on this watch. I forgot to mention, you're also getting a 100 meters of water resistance. So really high-end features. The only thing that is not completely high-end is the crystal. It is using a mineral crystal on there. So sapphire crystal would have been better, but again, in this price range, mineral's typically what you would get, and at $130, that's pretty amazing to get all of that packed in there. Now there are a couple of cons to the watch, as always. Again, the mineral crystal being one of them, kind of a minor drawback there. But another one, so that you've got a date function at 3 o'clock, and I think this is possibly a fault of the EcoDrive, because of the EcoDrive solar cell that's built into the dial. I think the dial is a little bit deeper than usual, and so the date is kind of situated deeper than you would normally see, which means that a lot of times you get some heavy shadows casting over the date, which can make it difficult to read. It's sort of really deep down in there, and if you don't get it at the right angle, you won't necessarily be able to read the date that well. There's a minor con there. The strap, I would say, is also a weakness of this watch. It's not a high quality strap. It's a genuine leather strap. The leather feels kind of dry, a little bit stiff. I've been wearing it for a couple of weeks now, and it's broken in a little bit. It does look very nice, so I appreciate that. I appreciate the looks, but it's not the nicest strap in the world. But on the other hand, the watch is, I think, looks really good on a wide range of straps. So it's fairly easy to take this strap off and swap out some other ones. And I found a couple of straps that I really like this on. I'll probably be wearing it on some of these other straps more often than the original one. Although again, I love the look of the original. I'd like to get maybe kind of a rally style strap like this. I think would really match the style of the watch. Maybe get an actual rally strap with made out of higher quality leather. Would be a nice upgrade. But the strap itself it's not a deal breaker. It's something that even if you didn't have the opportunity to change the strap out and you just wore it on the stock strap, it's not a terrible strap. It's not a great strap, but it's fairly comfortable and looks very nice. And then the final con is going to be a problem for some people is the size of the watch. It's a fairly large watch. So yeah, you got to kind of watch out if you can pull this off. I think, I think it wears pretty well for the size of watch that it is. I have a 7.5-inch wrist and I haven't had any problem wearing it. It is, it's not a dress watch by any means. It's definitely a casual watch, and I think, having a slightly larger case size for this sort of thing isn't really much of a problem. All that said, I've been incredibly impressed with this watch. It's really, kind of become one of my favorite ones to wear around. I love that I was able to pick it up for this low of a price. I don't have to worry as much about, getting it scratched up or banged around. It's really durable, 100 meters of water resistance. You've got that eco drive movement, so it's always good to go. Just so much to really like about it. And yeah, again, incredible functionality, great design. I really enjoy it. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys have seen this watch or have any experience, definitely let me know. If you're interested in picking it up, I'll put the links down below. And yeah, it's always great hearing from you guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.